Hello and good evening. On behalf of the Goethe-Institut Bratislava, I would like to welcome you to the kickoff and opening of our online event series titled The Gift That Keeps on Giving. My name is Markus Huber and I'm the director of the Goethe-Institut. Unfortunately, I cannot be here with you in this moment because I'm traveling, but I like to send you my best regards and thanks also to Lukáš Likavčan, who curated this event series. Today we will kick off the series with the event called Stoffwechsel, and I'm very curious to hear more about it, and I'd like to hand over to Lukáš, who will give an introduction to the event series itself and how it unfolds in the next month, and he will also introduce our esteemed guests, which I also would like to welcome that way, televised. So to the audience and to our guests, please enjoy this discussion and these inputs, and I'm very much looking forward to it. Thank you. See you soon.
Hello, everyone. That was Markus Huber, the director of Goethe-Institut Slovakia, and I thank him this way for his greetings and for the introduction of this event series called The Gift That Keeps on Giving. I also would like to thank at the very beginning to Zuzana, Freya, Tomáš, and Linda, who are the part of the team at Goethe-Institut and who made this curated event series possible. And when I'm talking about curating, my name is Lukáš Likavčan, and I'm a curator of this series. I'm a philosopher by training. I have a background in philosophy and environmental humanities, which I studied in Czech Republic. And throughout my research, at several points, I have stumbled upon the concept of gift or gift economy as something that became rather unintuitive to think about in contemporary economic, but not just economic, and in general, I would say social and theoretical thinking. So I decided to curate this series on gift economy as a sort of way to build some intuitions that we need to make a coherent picture of possibilities of what would it mean to have a gift economy today. Perhaps it exists, we just don't see it. I'm inspired by two resources, I would say, and the first is it comes from, some strands of contemporary philosophy. Let's say people like Ishor Shmatai talking about abundance in nature as the natural state of things rather than scarcity, which is an intuition that is usually contrarian to, let's say, mainstream neoliberal or neoclassical economics. And the second thing is that when we think about gifts, many times it brings a promise of some kind of social utopias. So this series is also designed to ask questions regarding the possibility of some kind of post-capitalist society or post-capitalist economy based perhaps on return of gift as a mode of exchange, something that may have been the default state of economy in the deep prehistory of humankind. This series is also a strong focus on artistic audience because we will be curious in the events to come, mainly in autumn, what are the possibilities of building different kinds of institutional models for gift exchange and artistic gift economies, which also brings me to some technological context of contemporary economy, such as platforms or blockchains. Those will be topics that we will talk about in depth in the events to come. But this event today is going to be more foundational. It's going to prepare ground, let's say, for thinking about crafting new gift economies. And to do that, what we need first to do is to reshape some basic assumptions of economic thinking. That's why the event today is called Stoffwechsel, which is a very nice German term for material exchange, or more contemporary, or translated in a more contemporary way, we would say that Stoffwechsel means metabolism. And metabolism is a very potent concept with connotations ranging from biology to economics to chemistry, or even thinking about artificial metabolisms and contemporary technologies. And this event is designed to, let's say, dive deep into this topic of metabolism. what does it mean to think about economy as metabolism? And what does it mean to talk about different or think about different folk economies that perhaps have already invented sophisticated gift networks and gift metabolisms? That's also the reason why I invited our three guests for this first event, Lukáš Senft, Eva Fraňková, and Rafael Pedroso, who will cover different aspects of folk economies, gift economics, and thinking about metabolisms in contemporary conceptual landscapes of humanities and social sciences, let's say. So without further hesitation, I would like to invite our first guest to speak today, and that's Lukáš Senft, who is an essayist and anthropologist. He is currently an editor of the essay section in Tvar literary magazine and a researcher at the Institute of Sociology at the Czech Academy of Sciences. He currently studies within the PhD program at the Faculty of Social Sciences at Charles University, where his doctoral research uses multi-species ethnography and is concerned with Czech mushroom foraging and the involvement of the mushrooms in Czech food production, economy, and health practices. Lukáš, the floor is yours. I'm really looking forward to hear your contribution. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for having me. I would like to present you my short ethnographic talk called Czech Mushroom Foraging Interspecies Gift Giving. And first thing is that I try to share my screen. So, do you see my PowerPoint presentation?
At the moment, we don't.
Okay. And now, do you see something?
Yes, now it's okay.
Okay, great. Okay, so let me start. In the USA and Western Europe, mushrooms are becoming a trendy organism. They are becoming the saviors of the world. They can do almost anything. Clean the soil, cure depression, create ecological and degradable materials, and inspire philosophical concepts. As if it's possible to do anything with mushrooms except to eat them. In many Western papers, Eastern European food subsistence, both gardening and foraging, is quite wrongly described as a coping strategy for poor regions. The result is a dichotomy in relation to mushrooms. The West is innovating through mushrooms, and Eastern Europe is, well, not dying because of mushrooms. The West saves the world. Eastern Europe cooks mushrooms in a jar. That's a photo from our household. Well, in fact, mushroom foraging in the Czech Republic is a more than human skill that has been passed from generation to generation and that has been produced by a pretty dense network of citizen science collectives. And unlike Western environmentalism, it is an activity that is not class specific. From bankers to the socially excluded citizens, almost everyone in the Czech Republic is a mushroom forager sometimes. As a result, mushrooms function as a massive part of the grey economy and grey sociality, as a gift through which bonds and relationships are formed. Most mushroom pickers give away more than half of the mushrooms they collect. It is possible to estimate that more than 10,000 tons of mushrooms circulate among people each year outside the market system. Their value is approximately more than 80 million euros at least. In the framework of my PhD research and research at the Institute of Sociology, in which Tereza Šteklová and Kateřina Kolářová also participate, we investigate various forms of economy and sociality in which humans and mushrooms are involved. Among other things, we focus on the gift economy of the foraging practices. Now I would like to present 3 ethnographic vignettes from the social mycelium of the Czech mushroom picking communities. My focus is on a gift economy that involves not only humans, but also non-human entities and collectives. The first one is the caregiver, negotiating the gifts of the biosphere. The caregiver, that's the name in our research, we anonymize our participants. The caregiver is a professional mushroom forager and amateur mycologist who sells mushrooms for a living. During a hike in the forest park, caregiver asked me, "Have you heard about the tragedy of the commons?" Later, I understood that the term has important meaning for him. The caregiver uses it to conceptualize his own attitude toward the forest commons, while also using the term to name what he considers greed. That means going beyond the appropriate amount of mushrooms to collect. He said to me, "There were commons in England where people could drive cattle out, but they overgrazed it instead of having a reasonable amount. Google the tragedy of the commons. So we let the baby mushrooms to grow up, even though it's clear we are not going to pick them. There are some people who will pick out the little ones, but you are not doing mushrooms any favors or your fellow mushroom pickers. But they just pick it up and they damage the mycelium by looking for the babies, turning it over and exposing the mycelium, and it gets easy access to the sun and the wind, and it blows the mycelium away." Well, caregiver considers the surplus in his practice. The accumulation of mushrooms, greed as he puts it, could lead to the destruction of the gift-giving mycelium. Yet, in caregiver's case, the primary motivation is not ecological commitment. A mushroom picker who knows the market value of mushrooms has no incentive to pick small mushrooms. By letting them grow, he provides a potential catch for other mushroom pickers who will come to the site in a few days, but he also maintains a productive ecosystem for himself in the future. Acceptance of mycorrhizal network gifts must be done carefully to ensure that the welfare of the gift-giving site is not disabled by the greedy accumulation of surplus. Second example is the priest, gift without the calculation. Well, one autumn day, me and my fiancée visited the mushroom exhibition organized by the Catholic parish in Prague. We were surprised that the Catholic parish organized the mushroom exhibition. There were a dozen of people in the garden, walking around tables with mushrooms on display. We learned that many of the mushrooms had been picked by the local parish priest himself. We met and found out that he was not only a priest, but also an entomologist who had discovered several species of beetles and who held exhibitions of his own illustrations of insects. Mushrooms are his passion. Later, he invited me to his parish flat, where a large shelf full of cooked mushrooms is found. Each jar has a homemade label with a photo of the mushroom or the priest himself and the title "Mushrooms from the Priest." He told me that he uses these jars of cooked mushrooms as gifts for his friends, and sometimes he holds tasting parties for close friends. They drink wine, taste the mushrooms, and judge which one tastes the best. But mushrooms are not only a hobby of the local priest. In the parish community, mushrooms are involved in maintaining the social cohesion of the parish collective and also in shaping the relationship of this community to the biosphere. Thus, you can see the photos where the tasting party is ready. The priest sometimes brings a truckload of mushrooms while he collects such a quantity of mushrooms, knowing that he will give away a large part of them as a gift. Some parishioners bring walnuts or eggs to the priest. However, it is not only food that is transformed into the gift, but also information about mushrooms. Parishioners sometimes come for advice when they don't know what kind of mushroom they have found. In return, they sometimes give information to the priest about a mushroom growing in their garden. The priest sometimes gives mushrooms to people for helping out in the parish, an activity that most parishioners usually do for free as a volunteer activity. Mushrooms from the priest serve as an expression of gratitude and appreciation. The cooked and dried mushrooms stabilize relationships not only horizontally, that means across the parish collective, but also vertically within the church hierarchy. The priest also brings jars of mushrooms to his superiors. The important thing is that the priest gives mushrooms to those people who like mushrooms. He must know they will appreciate the mushrooms. Mushrooms are not a unified, anonymous gift. Mushrooms are a gift for friends, as the priest himself points out. Mushrooms or biosphere can provide a gift to the humans. Importantly, such a gift is altruistic and usually without any return, according to the priest. In this respect, the priest believes that the growth of mycorrhizal sites can be a model of human action. Fungi and trees exchange substances with each other, but, the priest points out, many other organisms are connected to these networks. Some contribute, some merely feed on it. Humans, for example. Sometimes non-human and humans receive gifts freely and selflessly from mycorrhizal sites. And this is an inspiration, according to the priests. Don't always emphasize the calculation of what benefit comes from relationships. We should sometimes do our activities freely and selflessly to see oneself, one's own activity, also as a gift to others that does not require reciprocal reward. And the third image or ethnographic vignette is a guy whom I call the shroomer. The shroomer is a big proponent of magic mushrooms, psilocybes. He came to the Czech Republic from one of the former Eastern Bloc countries. He emigrated for two reasons, for his job and the magic mushrooms. When he first tried the psilocybes, he felt guilty. He had taken the drug, he was hurting himself, destroying his mind and body. It was due to the psychedelic community in the Czech Republic that he was able to fully develop his approach to the psilocybes as carriers of healing states of mind. The use of magic mushrooms gradually helped him to get rid of depressive states and neurosis. Well, this healing through psilocybin had a special effect on the shroomer. It did not lead him to start consuming magic mushrooms in increased quantities. Rather, the opposite. He is not a shroom gobbler anymore. However, this healing has made the shroomer attached to the shrooms. They became his life work. His main mission is this, to get rid the magic mushrooms of their negative reputation because he owes them. The magic mushrooms have helped him, now he must help them. He told me, when those mushrooms help someone out of depression, this person becomes an ambassador of the mushrooms. And that's what happened to me. They helped me, so now I feel the need to help them to dispel myth and spread true information. Me. Is it also your gratitude towards the mushrooms? Shroomer, it's total gratitude. Lukáš, it's reciprocity. Are you trying to repay them? Shroomer, that's how I feel it. It's interspecies cooperation. Well, the shroomer mentions that the mushroom pickers perform a barter trade. However, in relation to the psilocybes, it is not a commercial exchange, but a gift. Deliverance from depression has been given to the shroomer. He has been liberated from depression, and the shrooms must be liberated from anti-drug propaganda. Shroomer accomplishes this in three ways. First, the book. Shroomer has written an ebook in which he summarizes all the necessary knowledge about the psilocybes. This book is publicly available on the website. The PDF is free to download. Shroomer is distributing this book in print as well. Second, the fieldwork. Shroomer seeks out new places where the magic mushrooms grow, not to collect them, but to investigate how these mushrooms live, what they need, and how they coexist with other species. For example, Shroomer found that wild boars love the smell of the magic mushrooms mycelium. If traditional mushroom foragers meet him and ask what he doesn't hide the fact that he is looking for and studying the psilocybes. people are usually thrilled to have met someone who understands and can find these legendary mushrooms. And third is the insemination. Schrömer is not only an ambassador who fights against the magic mushrooms disinformation, a kind of interspecies PR agent. He also shows his gratitude by assisting in the magic mushrooms reproduction. His gift to these mushrooms is also his mediation in the process of their growth, because these mushrooms are not very tenacious and invasive. The likelihood of their expansion into other territories is not very great. Quotation of the Schrömer. When it comes to reproduction, these mushrooms are fucked, because the two fucking microspores have to hit a terrain, for example, a stick that's not already occupied, have to have the right moisture, and the mycelia have to meet and have to come from the two right groups of sexual spores. And there are dozens of types of sexual spores. An awful amount of different genders have to meet properly, genders of the spores. It's cool and it's unlikely over a long distance. So actually, without human or animal help, it would be very difficult for them to reproduce. Humans and animals have to relocate the forest substrate. So if the Schrömer finds a stick in the woods that is covered in white mycelium, Schrömer knows just the right place to move it to increase the likelihood of the magic mushroom's reproduction. He chooses sites with the right moisture and tree density and covers the overgrown stick with the right amount of forest humus. So from these briefly mentioned ethnographic vignettes, we can extract the following characteristics of the gift economy as it takes place within the Czech mushroom picking practice. First, mushrooms mediate the emergence and stabilization of human relations, reciprocal gifting of the finding sites, information, knowledge, but also mushrooms themselves. Second, however, the logic of gift also emerges within the mushroom practices in relation to more than human entities. And this is manifested, among other things, in the following. Care about the mycorrhizal gift-giving networks, non-reciprocal gift-giving as a normative for the human communities, an altruistic model of the biosphere as an inspiration for selfless giving. And the third, gratitude towards healing entities, repairing the relationship between humans and mushrooms as an expression of gratitude towards healing mushrooms. So these are three examples of gift economy, which is not only human, but also interspecies and more than human. And I thank you for your attention. This is the last picture, and I'm looking forward for another presentations and discussion.
Hey, thanks, Lukáš. I mean, you just demonstrated why ethnography is so important in, giving this kind of narrative texture to any kind of, research problem or a topic concept. It's great. Thank you so much. I forgot to mention one thing also to the audience, and that is that we will proceed now with the next presentation, and the Q&A will be held after all the 3 lectures are finished. So keep your questions or prepare your questions in the meantime. You can write them down into the chat, or you can also just speak up, unmute yourself and speak in the given time slot of the Q&A after we finish. I'm sorry. Okay, now let's move to the next presentation of Eva Fraňková. I will introduce Eva briefly, and I will give her floor right after that. Eva Fraňková works as an assistant professor at the Department of Environmental Studies at Masaryk University in Brno in Czech Republic. Her long-term research interests include alternative economic practices, eco-social enterprises, localization, and the concept of degrowth. She has been researching material, energy, and monetary flows involved in local food production at organic farms, as well as alternative economic practices and social enterprises in the Czech Republic. And I have asked Eva to prepare a presentation mostly about the concept of metabolism and ecological economics. So I'm really looking forward to hear her input as well. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure. So I will share the screen. Yep, you hear me, you see me. Yep, thanks.
All is great.
So thanks once more for the invitation. I really enjoyed reading the whole background of the series Lukáš prepared. So I hope it will somehow fit together, and we will see. This is more like an invitation to the whole research field of social metabolism and more generally ecological economics. Like you will see quite a lot of maybe pictures, and it's more like really to get some taste of how social metabolism can look and what it can bring, like which type of information. I'm not going in, definitely not into such a detail. We have just seen it's a bit like step back, but hopefully at least some teaser for you to get more into it maybe later. So the whole kind of baseline or some background where social metabolism as a field of study comes from is one of the streams within ecological economics that is represented, for example, by one of the, let's say, founders of ecological economics, who is called Herman Daly. And his insights that actually economy is not like self independent existing system, which also society is seen as not existing independently, but they are kind of subsystems of the whole planetary ecosystem or the planetary system, so part of the biosphere. And this is in a way inevitable, and it brings lots of implications for how economy can and cannot work. So this is one of the very famous kind of pictures of representations of how he sees the economic system as only like subsystem of the biosphere. And there is some kind of insight that on the very basic level, all the processes within economy are, at the end of the day, are linear, at least in terms of energy flow, which always goes from more like energy dense, let's say, resources or energy resources through any type of energy transformation. Always part of the energy so-called dissipates, so actually is not useful in for any type of work we could call useful. So this is how he visualizes it, so that always there is some exchange of materials and energies between the economic system, the social system, and the biosphere. And this is inevitable. It kind of brings some, let's say, dependence, or you could see it as a gift relation, maybe. You could see the whole solar flow of energy as the maybe biggest gift we are receiving, where all other like natural gifts, if you can see it, including the mushrooms, are actually kind of derived from. There is some, I would see it as a paradox in a way, that this kind of linear understanding, which actually comes from the second law of thermodynamics, brings the whole idea of actually trying to build a circular economic system, because this whole linear energy processes are included within any transformation of energy and material. Then actually you come to understanding that you have to actively build systems that are at least to a certain point circular, or trying to recirculate the materials, so that we don't even like promote this linear model of extracting, changing, or like transforming into services and goods, and then creating waste, basically. Whereas in mainstream economics, it's in a way kind of paradoxically the other way around, like one of the very, very famous and kind of baseline pictures actually sees the economic process as circular in like theoretical terms, that you have this kind of flow of resources, labor, and money between households and businesses. But actually, in reality, it creates a system which is completely linear, that goes from extraction through goods and services to waste, basically, because there is this lacking of understanding of the materiality, I would say, of economic processes. So that's what social metabolism and more generally ecological economics is trying to kind of bring, or one of the like streams of thinking is that this is crucial to understand that any social and any economic system not only reproduces itself through institutions, through culture, values, and our, let's say, decisions or preferences, but also biophysically through constant flows of energy and materials. In practical terms, it means that within analysis or like analytical insights, you primarily look at biophysical indicators. You also, of course, can use money as a unit of counting, but it's not definitely it's not the only unit you use. And primarily, you actually look at biophysical indicators such as hectares, if you look at land use, or hours of labor, for example, or time spent by people, and also on like gigajoules, tons, if you look at material and energy flows, and of course some like direct indicators. And of course this you can apply on different scales for different sectors, for different, like, let's say, research questions. As with any like concept, there are various ways how it's put into practice. So there are, I would call it, different schools or different approaches to social metabolism. One I know from people who are mainly based in Vienna, so I call it here Vienna School, but it's not any like official name. It's more like for you to have some imagination of where it comes from, which is maybe more, let's say, simple in analytical categories, but very useful to collect the data. For example, the European Statistical Office started, like, follows the methodology developed by these people and started to collect the material data for the European countries and for the European Union as a whole. So there is a really cool resource of information if you are looking for material data for specific countries. There is the link. I'm not going into details, but it's available, and I think it's really important, because for any debate you can have outside the GDP kind of focus, the data were lacking a lot, and now, at least for last decade, and the data set is being extended, it's getting better. And this is just I'm not going into details, but it's just to have some idea how the analysis can look in practice. This is a representation of one Austrian village and its material flows in 1830, and then like almost 200 years later. You can see some basic categories of materials that are like recognized, which is biomass, minerals, and fossil fuels. And what you can see, of course, what you could expect, is that the composition of the materials that are exchanged or that are part of the metabolism changed quite dramatically, also in the volume of all the size of the flow, and also the composition. There is, on local level, something that then could be generalized or looked at the more general level, and they talk about something they call socio-metabolic regimes or metabolic transition, which is trying to kind of show up that human society, as we know, kind of oversized, if I put it very simply, which means that the categories are obviously very broad, but it's just to show that, yeah, that the throughput of materials and energy, like the volume of how much it actually grew, because we know it somehow grew, and within revolution things changed, but this is to show how much they changed and how much we actually boosted the volume we put somehow into circulation. These are data for energy consumption. Again, you can see the kind of height of the difference between the various modes of functioning in very broad categories, but it's based on concrete case studies from different parts of the world. And what's the implication of it? Like, why to look at this is not only like to know, but to try to understand what's let's say the you could say like sustainable level or some kind of livable, long-term livable level of throughput of metabolic flow that we can achieve. And from all the data basically we have on the global level, it's clear that the volume of energy and materials we extract and we put into waste is too much, and that we have to look for some level that is more sustainable. And it's of course it's an open question how much it would be the sustainable level, or sometimes Herman Daly had the term of steady state economy, which is not something that is sucked, but something that has some, let's say, like dynamic balance of throughput of material and energy throughput that is sustainable in long term. And this line of study is kind of this was there with the Herman Daly, like one of his main questions was what's actually the right size of the economy. That's the question which mainstream like never asks, or almost never. Like there is this growth belief that you actually don't have to pay too much attention to natural resources because there are not the limits, but I don't think is the case in short. This is just another way of how social metabolism as some kind of a conceptual approach and methodological approach can be translated. It's I call it Barcelona School of Social Metabolism because I've met most of the people in Barcelona, and it's just to show that it can be kind of more complex. If I put it simply, they call it here it's applied to food systems or food sector, and they call the whole analytical categories as some kind of food grammar, and they don't use the prescribed analytical categories as is more the Vienna approach, but they actually develop the analytical categories as part of the case study or as part of the process or research process, depending on which questions you ask. So it's just to show that it can look differently. This is one of applications of this, let's say, more like complex way of doing socio-metabolic study. Here we look at both monetary flows in red and labor allocation in blue, and biophysical flows, meaning energy and material flows in green. We look at land use in hectares and some kind of interrelations among these. Yeah, I'm not going to explain all the categories. It's more like invitation. We have edited the whole book on application of social metabolism to local food systems, which both look at history in many case studies and also on current systems. So it's just that the field is broad. And again, I mean, it's in its basis, it's of course kind of a quantitative approach, you could say. So it might feel like it's some reduction of the system. I don't think it's the case in many of the studies. There is this kind of look at the flows of materials and energies, some kind of baseline or basic insight into the system, but it's not the only one. Of course, you can have lots of like representations of the system, like the graph is not the system, but it's one way how to look into it. You still lots of the studies, for example, this is like implications of one of the case studies from Spain, from one region in Spain that look into feedlots like in let's say like large scale pig meat production in Valles in Catalonia. And this is they kind of from this basic metabolic study on the regional level, they actually step out and look on the global aspects. And this is how many hectares are actually eaten by the Spanish pigs, if you put it simply. So how much space actually the Spanish pigs and the Spanish people eating these sausages are actually taking all over the world in very different countries by buying the feed for the pigs. So I only wanted to say that usually the studies, the socio-metabolic studies, are not looking only at the flows of tons of whatever wood and fossil fuels, but also it's of course has some like political implication or geopolitical implications. And one of, I think, really actually exciting or really interesting like use or examples of metabolic studies that have this political aspect, very strong one, is the whole studies of environmental conflicts that is done, I mean, by many people, but there is a very strong school in Barcelona by Joan Martínez Alier, who is also talking about social metabolism as like one, as a language, as a way of expressing some values and some like insight into how the system works on different levels, and also the global system. If you want to talk about, let's say, ecological unequal exchange, it's really useful to have the data, like how much are the flows that go in between regions and countries. This is another more application of the whole approach. And this is again, it's derived from the work of Herman Daly by one of his students, and it looks at a set of indicators where the biophysical indicators are kind of a baseline or like important part of the question how people are able to fulfill their needs sustainably, to what extent. So the question of, you could say, in a way, like one of the very big questions within ecological economics is actually this one: if we are able and how to do it to live a good life within planetary boundaries. And again, there is some operationalization of this question into a study, which I think is really interesting, and it works with, on one side, with the concept of planetary boundaries, which is some kind of ecosystem insight into what are the crucial like areas of ecosystem, of global ecosystem that we have to somehow, that we depend on one side, and we should try to keep working even for the future. And the donut model, which looks at the social, what Kate Rovers, the author, calls the social foundation of the society. That is basically how we are able to fulfill our needs. So it works with what they call the safe and just space for humanity. And within the study, they look at which countries are able to be in this, let's say, the green space, where you fulfill the social foundation, where you are able to fulfill human needs, and at the same time, like not transcend or not cross over the environmental boundaries or the ecosystem boundaries. And I think here you see the very, on the X, you see how many biophysical boundaries were transgressed within, according to the study. And on the left side, you see how many of the social needs or how many areas of the social foundation were achieved. So basically, the ideal would be not to transgress the biophysical boundaries and to fulfill as much of social needs as possible. And from the analysis, you can see that actually in the ideal place, there is not, it's not definitely crowded. And there is basically none of the states that were part of it, and they included almost all the countries of the world. which is a way how to show that actually, I don't think it shows that it's impossible to be there, but that the current economic system definitely doesn't lead there, or is not designed so that we fulfill this, so that we at the same time try to fulfill people's needs and keep the let's say planetary limits. So it's a way how to use let's say the metabolic insight or biophysical insight combined with the social social sphere to, I think, really look for answers to this, to my view, like really important questions, like how to define in a way also, and how to fulfill, how to live good life that is available to all for longer term. I don't know, Kash, do you want me to tell me the time? Do I still have, I mean, this
we're
is
slightly
area
over. Yeah, we're slightly over 15 minutes, so
yeah,
we can wrap up and move to Rafael now. Yeah.
Yeah. I just, if I can say the last, very last bit.
Of course, yeah.
I think what's really interesting, like sphere of also like discussing in a way the limits and this biophysical insight is within the degrowth movement, where actually the whole notion of biophysical limits can be interpreted as, okay, we will just, like, scientists will tell us where is the boundary, and we can then kind of get as close to it as possible, and this again still be in this, let's say, like productivist mode of let's take as much as we can, we still survive, but we have a lot. And there is a debate within degrowth that this is actually very tricky in a way, and that we should look for the limits more inside ourselves, not necessarily the outer ones or the external ones, but to look for them as part of our autonomy or our like voluntary decision to not to take as much as possible. And just the main points I wanted to make is that I think the biophysical insight is very crucial if we want to understand economy, and that the social metabolism is not anyhow like reductivist playing with numbers, but it opens lots of interesting questions. Thanks, and sorry if I took too much time.
No problem at all. Actually, we're really happy to have such a deep insight into different views on social metabolism after your presentation. Thanks so much for that, Eva. And with that, I'm going to move now to Rafael Pedroso, who is a Brazilian independent scholar, and he holds a master's in international relations at PUC Rio, with a thesis focused on reading Marx in the Anthropocene by weaving together Marxist ecology and media theory. He is currently finishing a certificate in critical philosophy at the New Center for Research and Practice, where he also works. And his interests revolve around political economy, ecology, technology, and political experimentation. And I'm giving the floor to Rafael by this way, and I'm looking forward to how this piece of, let's say, Marxist political economy fits into the grander picture of metabolisms and gifts.
Yes, thank you very much, Lukáš. Let me just quickly share my screen. Can everybody see it?
Yes.
So yeah, just like giving some credit, I'm gonna just show a few images and a few diagrams. The images are all AI generated, so it's all Wikigan, and the diagrams are produced by the STP group, which is one of the study groups in which I have developed many of these hypotheses. And yeah, and let me just start some timer here so I can have something to orient myself. But yeah, it's an immense pleasure to have been invited to the series, and this has been also a great opportunity for being acquainted with Lukáš's and Eva's work. So I hope that my contribution can serve as an introduction to Karatani in a way, and also perhaps help us conceive a shift from commodity economy or a commodity-focused economy to a renewed economy of the gift, and how would that work. mainly. And I have to give some, I wanted to acknowledge particularly like 3 places in which I have sort of developed the ideas for this research. So the first one is the subset of theoretical practice, in which I have published an earlier version of this. And also the new Center for Research and Practice, which is the institution where I work in and also where I study critical philosophy, and also the cybernetic research, the Circuit for Cybernetic Research, which is a student-led organization from Brazil, in which we run very different study groups on a lot of interesting things, particularly focusing on, and I run the political economy and organization group over there. And also to Lukáš, who have incentivized me a lot to get into that research, Gabriel and Jean-Pierre Caron, and who helped me flesh out many of these things. So to start everything, I wanted to start by introducing what's Karatani's theoretical system and how does it relate to the concept of metabolism. Eva did a lot of the heavy lifting over there already, so I don't have to worry that much about that part. And I want to introduce Karatani's endeavor and explain his framework, offering some readings of what does it have to do with ecology. And you can see this another version of that in the section 8 of Atlas of Experimental Politics, which was published by Schum. And then I hope that like this can sort of gear us towards some questions on our Q&A and how those categories that I'm going to show can actually help us to construct a new ecology of social practices. So beginning with talking about Karatani. Karatani is a Japanese scholar, and his project in the book that I am talking mostly about, which is Structure of World History, can be summed up as an attempt of returning to the triad that is revealed by Hegel's philosophy of right. So the capital nation state triad as being a particular historical configuration of social forms that are recognizable in other historical contexts as well, that although they are contemporary, they can be recognized like as a logic in other retroactive social formations. He called these forms modes of exchange, and he wants to apply to community life and the state, and also the exchange of commodities, a critical procedure similar to that which Marx performed for capital. So it's a project of expanding the type of critique that Marx has performed of political economy. And before delving into that, it's worth noticing that when talking about modes of exchange, although he uses the word exchange, Karatani is actually expanding what exchange means by equating the usages of exchange with the concept of intercourse, which is a Verkehr in German. Sorry for my terrible German. And it's a concept that is briefly deployed by Marx in the German ideology in reference to Moses Hess's work. And Moses Hess is a lingering influence that can be traced at least to the economic and philosophical manuscripts, one of the young Hegelians. But the conceptual role that this concept plays for Marx in that text, as Karatani knows, is twofold. So on the one hand, it becomes a way of speaking of exchange in general, beyond commodity exchange, and seeing phenomena as different as trade, warfare, communitarian life, as processes that are permeated by acts of socialization. On the other hand, I want to argue that this broadening of the concept of exchange can be traced back both to Moses Hess and also to Karatani, can lead to another way of picturing the social as such, one in which, if I quote Karatani, relations between man and nature necessarily take place by way of a certain kind of social relation between people. And I think this matches a lot with what Eva was talking about in socio-metabolic regimes. And to make that case, I think it's worth mentioning that Hess did not have two separate concepts of relation, one focusing on nature and another on sociality, but rather he conceived social relations as always including man and nature, described by him as a form of metabolism, so Stoffwechsel. And however, Karatani does not integrate the entirety of the ecological implications of that into his theory. And we could indict Karatani for that and say that he comes from a Marxist tradition, which is notoriously social-centric when talking about the economy and the critique of political economy. But I want to take that as an invitation for further theorization and argue that such an expansion of meaning of exchange through the category of intercourse, which sort of brings in the category of metabolism as well, can be a fruitful thing to do. So recapping that first bit, we have mainly exchange is the most usual concept and like more economic doxa. Metabolism is the term that consistently appears in Marx's work, and intercourse is a way that Karatani integrates and enlarges the meaning of the economic to include both of these dimensions. And in fact, by weaving metabolism back into the concept of intercourse, we're following a lingering thread within Marx's work too, which extends itself up until Capital and in Marx's unpublished, but recently thoroughly analyzed ecological notebooks. And in those notebooks, he delves into the agricultural sciences of his time by Justus von Liebig. And he wants to deal with the ecological consequence of capitalist accumulation. Another Japanese Marxist scholar, Kohei Saito, argues that metabolism, Stoffwechsel in Marx, is the device to understand the inflection of economic forms, Formwechsel, into and through matter. This will become more grounded when we talk about Karatani's modes of exchange by the end of the talk, but for now, we should keep in mind that Saito's proposition is that within Marx's ecological studies, there is a twofold approach to the way that an object, such as the economy or such as an economic relation, is treated. So they are treated from their material perspective, so Stoffwechsel, and their formal aspect also. So this is pretty much what Saito is getting at as a hermeneutic for talking about these questions in Marx. And if we pick that thread connecting Karatani's usage of intercourse and the way Saito reads it, the concept of intercourse must be read keeping in mind that every social form happens through a material base and implies a certain social relationship between man and nature. In other words, every attempt to reconstruct social relation as a logical structure or to perform a certain structural reading of history must contend with its actualization through a material basis. Of course, we have to remember that Marx's materialism is a materialism of the social relation. So social relationships are important, very important for Marx. But in our reading, since the concept of social relations is filtered through the metabolic imprint and through the concept of intercourse, we are not exactly confining our analysis to the type of materialism that, to paraphrase Althusserian jargon, not an ounce of matter passes. So in fact, we end up with the two aspects of objects, both in their material and the formal dimensions. And this move represents a significant rupture for Marxist influenced scholars because usually Marxism delegates the scientificity of its inquiry to the analysis of the economy as such. So it accepts the economy as that which grants scientificity to its analysis of social forms. But in our hand, when we talk about ecology, since the economy is neither a base nor a final absent cause, it has its meaning expanded. So let's just see how Karatani does it. And so Karatani says that usually Marxist theory has attempted to supplement the economically deterministic forms of Marxism by introducing an existential and moral moment, so an ethical or ontological justification for communism. Let's narrow it down like that. But in my view, this is unnecessary, according to Karatani, because if you rethink the economic base from the perspective of exchange, broadly defined, there's no need to posit a moral dimension exterior to the economy. So in the quote above, Karatani is not denying the moral or ethical considerations as a motivation, but rather he's refusing to extricate moral forms from social practice. And my contention means that we must also take an additional step and see these modes of exchange as ecological regimes, which also have their own ethical implications. And we can observe that rethinking economic base from the perspective of exchange implies that exchange is understood in a twofold integration between a categorical critique of the forms which structure our consciousness erected by the modes of production and the impact that they have on the material substrate upon which the social itself is erected. This represents an additional step within the framework stemming from Marx, which tries to forge a link between historically configured modes of production and consciousness. So after we did this sort of overarching introduction, we get to Karatani finally. And this is Karatani's scheme, right? From what he calls the capital nation state triad. So nation is A, capital, it stands for a way of communitarian life, state is B, and capital is C. So these are the letters we'll be using. And for Karatani, these different historical moments can be synthesized through a combination of what he calls modes of exchange. So A standing for a logic of the community, which appears currently as the logic of the nation, B standing as the organization of plunder and redistribution, and C standing for the trade of commodities, which is the prevailing mode in our current historical conjuncture. So to start with each of these modes, with mode A is called by him reciprocity, and many examples of that are gift giving or magic, for example. In mode A, we have the intercourse is actually a mediating practice, which entails a giving-taking relationship. And since the world of mode A is a reciprocal one in which the other is assumed as a detainer of anima, and so as an equal part to an exchange, Rituals and magics are some of the devices that allows something to be taken as an object, even if temporarily. So the rituality of consumption and so on appearing in so-called primitive societies can be an example of that. But we should be mindful, however, that reciprocity does not entail harmony or more freedom by default. And in fact, it is in itself a way of controlling, even if the object of control is seen as equal to the one of controlling at times. So, for example, instances of aggressive gift-giving and vendettas are also like within mode A, and they can be like violent in the way of questioning the other part or on his engagement in that relationship of reciprocity. And in fact, the dynamics of gift counter-gift and their demand for the other part to reciprocate implicate an oscillation that keeps the possibility of a permanent hierarchy. So as it's sort of like has a temporal succession in each of the persons has its turn to actually be there. Nature, it sort of keeps a hierarchy at bay. So in that sense, nature appears as an agent, as an equal entity within which one can establish a relationship of reciprocity. Mode B, on the other hand, needs to be understood in relation to plunder and redistribution, which is exemplified by statecraft and by the onslaught of agricultural societies that Eva spoke about earlier. It implies a different way of visualizing nature and therefore demands different technical apparatuses that make nature legible to that state or that state-like formation, and are often rendered in terms of uniformization from the institution of common forms of measurement, mapping land, and taxation. And because nature appears to the state as in the same way that dominated communities appear to dominant ones as targets of plunder and whose objects are targets of redistribution, nature is produced within Mod B as a resource to be managed. So this is another image of nature, right? So the first one is nature as this this reciprocal gift giving, and this other one is this target, this asset for administration. And of course, we cannot extricate the state from capital. So Mode B and Mode C, although they have these slightly different logics, we are seeing their historical onslaught is pretty much similar, and they appear in different combinations in different social formations. These are all, we could say, ideal types. And Mode C, commodity exchange, is seen as the prevailing side in our contemporary discourse and is linked to the vast tradition of analysis of capitalism, spotted by the moment through which, within the commodity logic, objects relate to one another through relations of equivalence that are expressed in quantitative predicates. So a price is an example of a quantitative predicative, and as a monetary magnitude. And the logic of value, insofar as commodities are equivalent to one another, is akin to the logic through which nature becomes equivalent with the predicate of matter. So here, just to recap, we have three images of nature. So first, nature in the Mode A appearing as an agent. This is all appearances that it makes through the perspective of capitalism, right? And from Mode B, nature appearing as this perspective of a resource that is to be managed, and from the perspective of Mode C, nature appearing as matter that only gets its own validation as a valid thing to account for, particularly in mainstream economics, as if it produces value. And we can also use that to perhaps try to make a provisional mapping of our theoretical landscape to the figures that appear to talk about nature in theoretical discourse. And I am almost over. I think I'll go 2 minutes over time, but I'll try to be quick. So seeing nature as the earth, for example, combines the agency in Mode A with the management predicament of Mode B into a picture of the human as that cognition which emerges from earth, and earth as a place of the dwelling of the human as this experiential subject. The second would be seeing nature as Gaia, which has a vast literature in which this is spoken about, but it's basically the conjunction of Modes A, hope of reciprocity, with the interconnectedness of matter that becomes visible from the studies in the sciences that transform nature into matter from the perspective of Mode C. And seeing nature as the planet, which comes from the perspectives of Mode B and C, so nature as resource and nature as as matter, and are related to the ruthless disenchantment that comes with the contact between human scales and the big scale of the planet, and the fact that nature appears as this strange force erupting. And while these are all familiar categories and frameworks to which the question of the future of metabolism has appeared, they are far from exhaustive. And I have a quote about Karatani's vision for the future and its relationship to Marxism and communism, perhaps. And quoting Ernest Bloch, Karatani says that Marxist philosophy is what one could call a philosophy of the future that attempts to see the not yet conscious. So it is a forward-dreaming philosophy. And Marx writes, on the other hand, that communism is for us not a state of affairs which is to be established, an ideal to which reality will have to adjust itself, but we call communism the real movement which abolishes the present state of things. The conditions of this movement result from the now existing premise. So this is the utility of actually mapping all these things and seeing them as these sort of apparatuses that emerge from the perspective of capital itself in which we live. And synthetically, Karatani defines what he calls the mode D, communism. And for him, mode D is a regulative ideal, which marks the return of mode A, so the return of reciprocal gift giving in a higher form. And mode of exchange D is this way of trying to restore the reciprocal community. One could call it, as Lucas, I think, spoke about many instances of that, the non-reciprocal gift giving. And this is the same example that Karatani uses in another context. However, if we look at it, one could argue that this grounding is in itself problematic because it sort of stands outside of the systems of exchange. It derives itself from and sees one of it, and it sort of makes this bird eye view in which only one of them will actually be implemented and like serve as the ground point through which mode D will be formulated. And there's another solution for that, which don't let the graphic scare you, which is what has come with the STP collective. And STP says that they would rather instead derive the possibilities of that not from the modes that are cognitively mapped by capital, as Karatani does. So he says that like from the perspective of capital, that mode A is the return which we should wait for in mode D, but they would say that all the possibilities should be derived out of political organization and practice. So there is something that goes beyond the encumbering of capital itself, which are the different organizational practices. And I think Lucas gave a very good example of that. And in this incorporates the fact that the modes themselves are apprehended through how each of many movements, ecological or even like labor movements, portray organizational, political experiments. And these two modes of picturing the appearance of communism each have their own consequences, which I hope we can circle around at some point. But a last question emerges, a last one, sorry. And this question is, could Karatani's diagram be a helpful device for analyzing theories, political experiments, and existing practices as possibilities for building another future, perhaps, and for rethinking metabolism as such, as a part, an integral part of that another future? And yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to be quiet now.
No, don't. Thank you so much, Rafael. I mean, this was also a very elucidating talk in also confronting us with complexity of, I mean, different forms of exchange and different modes of exchange, and also like modes of imagining economy and social metabolisms. I would ask the audience, in case they have any questions, they can type them down into the chat, or perhaps they can also speak up. But in the meantime, perhaps perhaps we still need a couple of minutes to prepare those questions, and that's a good occasion for me to intervene with my curiosity and some questions that I was thinking about in relationship to the talks that we've just heard. Because one of the interesting things about the topic of the gift in general is that, I mean, coming back to Lukáš and his first presentation, is that it's probably the most classical topic in anthropology and ethnography, starting with Marcel Mauss and all other, I mean, scholars elaborating on the topic of the gift. And I think that one of the aspects that became a bit evident also today, especially when accounting for Lukáš and also Rafael's presentation, is like this question of reciprocity, like to what extent gift is a binding force or an act that actually, you know, establishes some kind of debt. It's kind of analysis that perhaps we can pick up also from some studies by writers such as David Graeber and his analysis of debt and the emergence of debt. And I wonder, what is your opinion on this like double nature of gift and gift exchange? That on the one hand, we sometimes idealize gifts as, you know, like altruistic acts, but on the other hand, there is also a moment of transaction happening when we give something.
Okay, is it a question for me?
I would say that anyone who feels like answering the question
Okay.
can speak up. Yeah.
Okay, so if anyone want to start, but I guess I say something. Yeah, I totally agree with your comment about the double side of the gift concept, because I think that concept of gift is pretty good, because you can map operations outside the formal market system. But on the other hand, sometimes I have feeling that when I read anthropological and ethnographic papers, there is no escape from the gift, because it's almost impossible to do something in altruistic way, because there is some assumption that if you give somebody something, that create an obligation. And I don't have an ultimate answer, but it is an ultimate question for me. And this is question I'm dealing right now, because when I discuss, for example, my ethnographic or ethnographic material, because I have to give credit to my colleagues Teresa Šteklová and Kateřina Kolářová, when we discuss it with other people from ethnographic field, it's pretty hard to give some impression that maybe there is a gift without an obligation, because everyone is full of theories that there is always a debt and obligation and commitment and so on. But I do believe that you can give something without creation of an obligation. But it's pretty, and that's last from me, it's pretty hard to have some data that some gift hasn't created an obligation, because you give gifts to people you know and you like and you meet them frequently. So it's pretty natural that there is some gift circulation, but it doesn't have to mean that it's the result of some kind of debt. But that's my work now, to find out if there is among foragers community some non-reciprocal or altruistic giving.
Yeah. But I see that Zenobia has a question for Rafael, but before moving to that question, I would like to ask actually Eva, how does this fit into, or how can this potentially fit into degrowth perspective, especially when we think about, I mean, gift giving as a form of economic practice that goes against some standard mainstream economic assumptions about how people behave, let's say in economies. But you know, these fantasies of homo economicus that I know are quite criticized within the degrowth discourse. So I'm just curious about whether you can say a few words perhaps about what are the potential meeting points between these perspectives.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I don't have this like strong anthropologist background around the gift and all the meanings and this reciprocity question and stuff. Like for me, definitely Marcel Mauss and the gift economy is somehow part of the degrowth, let's say, resources or topics that are discussed. But it's not, to me, it's not like a central concept. I know it's more the terms such as like first sharing. Because gift to me, I don't know how much this is reflected in the anthropological literature. I don't know. Just by like feeling, the gift means that the ownership kind of goes from somebody to somebody. I don't know. To me, it's related with the ownership. And in any case, like in degrowth, there is the shift more to from ownership or the whole like private ownership to sharing economy, or like also sharing economies can be commodified in a way, as is discussed in literature and on many case studies. But the kind of, let's say, authentic sharing, if I can put it like this, like really, which is related to the concept of commons, or this kind of regimes where the responsibility and also the use or the taking of the gifts, if you want, but also the responsibility and the care for ecosystems, for any relations, for somebody, is somehow, not the question of of an individual, but something that has to be negotiated, the political process of establishing some rules or some, modes of how we want to, on the very general level, fulfill the needs or use the space, use the resources we have. So the more like prominent words in the degrowth debate, I would say, is the sharing the commons as some like regime or way of putting things, and some this in the context of, let's say, like non-monetized economy or decommodification as some counter process to what we are facing mostly within the mainstream, if it makes sense.
Totally. I mean, I feel like there's even a potential connection with some of the aspects of Rafael's input when, I mean, we can think about commons and common pooling of resources, actually, of, let's say, imagining, and I know that this is a bit naive or idealistic to say, but I think that there's a grain of truth in that to think about the planet or nature as the gift giver, as basically the resource giver, in the way that actually it's a certain common resource that cannot be, taken as a personal or individual ownership and has to be managed collectively, because with this kind of like moral authority of the natural gift, which then also explains or kind of like justifies a certain mode of managing that resource in a collective manner. But with that, maybe Rafael, there's a question for you from Zenobia, which actually I'm also curious to hear your answer on, especially relating to like, what is that mystical letter K at the center of most of your diagrams? But I will read the whole question now from Zenobia. I would like him to expand on those TC plus TB, TA plus TB, and TA plus TC pairs, which should relate to Gaia, Earth, and planet, if I'm not mistaken. Why are they positioned in such a way? And hence also this part of the question that I'm also quite curious about, what would be the center letter K in the diagram?
Yeah, I just realized that I didn't talk about I didn't make a clear statement of the letter K. So the letter K stands for capital, basically, and we're talking about like a particular standpoint in which the social formation from which we look at the diagram. So that's what's situated. That's why it's situated in that manner. I think this is the easiest way of actually picturing it. But so it's sort of what situates the diagram within that particular social formation. So like it's the thing that gets decomposed by the modes, and that gets it's the object that is explored by the modes, by the combination of the modes, perhaps. And talking about these combinations that Zenobia is mentioning, so this is I think there are two steps to making that argument. I did make sort of the tentative first step, which is to say that each of these, so that the Earth, the planet, and Gaia are cognitive images that are current metaphors to talk about nature in our theoretical and even like political landscape. That they become these. And the ways that they are described, I am mapping them in as a combination of at least two modes. From that, majoritively, it takes an image of nature as seen from the perspective of these two modes. So when I talk about Gaia taking the image of nature being as matter and also as gift, I'm talking that that what is predominant when people picture Gaia, they're talking about these two features of nature that are visible from that perspective. So visible from the perspective of nature as a gift giver, visible from the perspective of nature as material interconnectedness, and which is something that is visible by modern science and its kinship with capital. So that's pretty much how each of these work. But it's interesting that the diagram works in a way in which, when you look at it, you can see, you can talk about how each of these relationships appear, for example, and it can serve for a variety of things. Like, for example, you can talk about, to give a very vulgar example, like you can talk about TV shows for instance, and locate them into like what are the logics that sort of like advance the plot into those specific things. So if you look, for example, let's talk about Succession, for example, as a TV show. Succession is a show that is mostly like animated by the relationship between mode C. So it's like you have the company life and you have like the commodity logic and the financialization of their own relationships, and mode A, which is usually in capitalist societies, mode A is mostly restricted to the familiar drama, right? So the only instance in which you have reciprocal gift giving, and not even that sometimes, is usually by the configuration of the family. So that's what is sold to people. So that the combinations of the diagrams serve. The idea is that it serves for objects within a capitalist society. So it can serve either from like how within a capitalist society you can look at this very big object that is nature, or it can serve for like an episode of Succession, for example. Like what are the forces that are over there? What are the things that appear from that perspective? And it has a whole, like, there are far more things about that other people in the subset for theoretical practice can talk about, like category theory and how it talks about different theories of logic and how the diagram composes them. That I'm not that qualified to talk about, but the diagram in itself can be a very interesting tool in that sense. So, and I want to comment a little bit on the gift without reciprocity thread that Lukáš was picking up also. And it's interesting that in Karatani's work, the example that he gives about like the emergence of the imagination of a gift without reciprocity, so how it starts being pictured, and he gives it through universalist religions. In fact, that universalist religions usually they become a current thing within the world, particularly after a certain development of commerce between nations, and that it promises that this idea of universalism, which is something that is related to a gift without, for which there is no reciprocal possibility. And of course, like I think that this is a very weird image to be made, but he talks about particularly how these monotheistic religions appear both through the perspective, like through the onslaught of the state and also commerce, but also that it aims to get back to that first reciprocity that got lost. So that idea. And the other example that he gives is nomadism, right? That in nomadism you don't have the instance of reciprocity fully established with nature, because you can you can just run away from nature in a way. Like you can just move from place to place. You don't have to like have a relationship to the dead you bury in one place, for example, or to the like to that particular plot of land for a long time, because you are like there's a geographical dimension to it. But I wanted to get to the question of the commons also, because I found it really interesting, both of Lukáš and Eva's talks, because like as someone from Brazil, the commons have always been a very difficult thing to imagine, because I don't think we have something that was slightly similar to the commons in Europe in a way. I think we had alternative plots of social organization that indeed had their own common ownership of land. So we can talk about indigenous societies or quilombos, which were resistance communities by slaves, African slaves that were running away from the plantation. But it's very interesting to see. I would love to hear more about the remainings of that imaginary of the commons within like within your context, and also how it could be in Europe more broadly, but also within the particular context that Lukáš have been researching. Because I found that like a very interesting linkage to make, and I think that it appears as a political opportunity also for political organization of these communities.
May I?
Of course.
Oh, okay, thank you. I just want to elaborate on the topic of commons, because the Czech foraging tradition has developed also thanks to quite unique Czech legislation concerning the foraging of the forest crop. Because for, I don't know, maybe 100 years, there are laws concerning foraging of the forest crops, which state that if you are in a forest, you don't have to care if you are in a private or state-owned forest. You can forage, you can pick and collect whatever you want. In current law, there is only one limitation, and that is that you can take amount of your own use, only the amount you use, but there is no specification of this amount, what your own use means. And if you read the commentary on this law, there is stated that there is no interest to specify that, because it would stop people from foraging and it would stop transfer of forest crops to the market. So forests are not commons in a precise sense, but the forest crops are considered as commons, even in a private forest. You can just forage whatever you want, and in any amount you want, because there is no specific law which would state that just two mushrooms and stop. No, you can take all mushrooms you want. But, and last thing, there is non-formal mushroom foraging ethics, as for example the caregiver, that the professional mushroom foragers know that you can plunder all the way down from of the forest, but by the law you can forage whatever you want, because forest crop is basically commons.
That's really interesting. I haven't been aware of that, Lukáš. Thanks for letting us know. Eva, are there any other examples of such almost accidental commons-based logic in jurisdictions of states, or like perhaps related to farming or some other sectors?
Sorry, my thoughts went to different. I will try to get back to your question. I just wanted to say that within ecological economics, there is quite a big stream of debate about the tragedy of the commons and how it's like wrong. Actually, by Hardin, the original, of the origin of this title is like really wrong interpretation of what the commons actually is. So I only wanted to say that Nadia Johannisová, the colleague of mine, in her book, which is in Czech, but she also published in English, the case studies from Global South about the commons, like actually existing ones in like different geographical, political, global contexts, and how they operate, and also the kind of theoretical critique of Hardin and how he misinterpreted the whole notion of what commons is. I can't think of the Czech examples, sorry. I'm pretty sure there are. I mean, for example, within the, we did some research in the Czech gardening kind of, there is this formal association, which definitely doesn't have any like political or alternative like agenda, but in their practices of how they manage the land, how they share the crops, how they share knowledge, I would say that lots of the, for example, this gardening, spaces are actually managed in various forms of, or like various levels of, I don't know if I could it commons, but like, something different from private ownership, definitely. Like I've heard the really interesting talk by some Indian, let's say, ecological economist who was describing the different modes of commons in India, so that it's always a combination. I forgot the analytical categories, sorry, I never went into details, but there is different combination of the, let's say, like informal social rules and the formalized rules, be it legislative ones or some like community ones, and the kind of physical mode, how they operate in the space and how they manage the the watering system, the seeds, the fields. So definitely it's like broad field. I don't know if I answered the question. In Czech, I would have to think about it more, probably.
Thank you, Eva. I'm wondering whether there is anyone from the audience that would like to speak up or give it the last round of questions, because there's so much to unpack and so many things that I would like to talk about with you, but we're running at more than 90 minutes at the moment. And also I promised you, but also I promised also people at Goethe-Institut that we should end by 6:30, at least here in Europe, CET time. I know that Rafael is 5 hours behind and he has a lunchtime, so also perhaps that's the reason to end soon as well. And the audience is actually slowly leaving the common virtual space here at Zoom. So let's call it the end of this session. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. I enjoyed that massively. I thank you so much for all the great input, and also for picking up so many threads that probably will also lead to, I mean, some ideas about how to curate this series in the future, because we will have some ongoing events in autumn that originally should go more, let's say, in direction of platform economies and, I mean, technological mediation of lived exchange today. But there's also still a possibility to, let's say, talk more about common-based economies and to think about all these other aspects and examples that also some of you have mentioned today. So yeah, thanks so much. And yeah, let's see each other at the next occasion. This is a series, just to underscore that once more. So this is not the last event. This was the first event of the Gift That Keeps on Giving series, and we will continue most probably this autumn with at least 3 other events. So take care and see you soon again.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure.
Have a nice day.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.